Hey guys, how's it going? It's Joe Man Luke. On this channel, I like to make builds that are easy to play, fun to play, cheap to build, and that can do all the content in the game. And this week, we definitely have one of those. I have been playing a Choir of the Storm Spark Blood Mage, and it has been so much fun. If you are looking for a interesting lightning build that is a little bit more off meta, then this might be a build for you. Now, as always, if you want to skip all this BS, the link to my Maxroll build guide will be in the description down below, so you can just skip right to it and just go there if you don't want to watch all this. On there, I will have the entire passive tree, all the items I'm currently using, all the skills and the skill gems, and usually some notes on how to level the build in the description. Now, I know what you might be thinking, Joe Man, I've seen 1,000 Spark builds, and while that is true, this is a Spark build. Spark is actually not the thing that is dealing all the damage. It is, in fact, the Choir of the Storms. If we take a look at our damage here, you can see that Greater Lightning Bolt, which is triggered on a critical hit from the Choir of the Storm, has a DPS of 194,000, and it can crit for way higher than that. And our Spark only has a DPS of 22,000. So the vast majority of our damage is coming from the Choir of the Storm, and I think that's what makes this build kind of unique and cool. The basics of the build are that we just cast our Spark, the little tendrils go around and they hit enemies, critting them, and that triggers the Choir of the Storms to call down a big lightning bolt that then zaps them for like 1,000,000 damage. As you saw at the beginning of the video, we were able to kill the Breach Lord, the Trial Master, and we even got a kill on the Arbiter of Ash for the first time, which I was super happy about, and it was pretty easy. Now, as I'll talk about later, all of the gear that I bought for this build was 1 Divine or less. Some of them were only 20 to 40 Exalts, and some of the more expensive pieces were a Divine. But I did not spend more than 1 Divine on any singular piece in this build, so you can definitely make this build for pretty cheap. The only real limiting factor is access to Choir of the Storm, so this isn't a build that you'll be able to easily do on solo self-found until you kill the Breach boss a few times and pick one up yourself. However, Choir of the Storm is currently only a 1 to 5 Exalt item, so you can pick these up off of the trade site for dead cheap. The only issue with it is that it does have quite a high level requirement, but there's really no reason that you can't run Spark and cast on crit for quite a while with like Lightning Conduit. It would serve the same general purpose. Now, I tried a bunch of other lightning skills to try and apply the Choir of Storm, and I just didn't have nearly as much luck as I did with Spark. The difference was immense. I tried Arc, I tried Orb of Storms, I tried Ball Lightning. Basically, everything was not as good as Spark because Spark can go such a wide distance and it shoots so many projectiles that it has a ton of opportunities to crit and it can hit multiple enemies all at once. So let's jump into a map real quick and I'll show you how the build works. So as we run around, basically all we do is cast Spark, which then hits enemies, crits them, and calls down a big lightning bolt. Now, Spark does deal enough damage to kill most of these white monsters and blue monsters, but the rares you're going to need a Choir of the Storms proc on to really deal the big damage and kill them super fast, especially on high-level maps or if you're running super high Delirium or something. I've been able to do T16, T17 maps with 30% Delirium without any issue. I also have Mana Tempest on the build just for a little bit of extra burst damage. You can see here that once we have that, our DPS goes up quite significantly. However, you do need to be a little bit careful because it will run your life and mana out really fast. Now, since Choir of the Storm requires you to crit in order for it to proc, I decided to go with Blood Mage, and I already had one leveled up, so I basically just repurposed it. Blood Mage makes it super easy to get high amounts of crit for very cheap. As you can see, if I go into my Greater Lightning Bolt, we have an 88% crit chance with 329% crit damage bonus. Now, the only real issue with this build is that the Choir of the Storms does have an internal cooldown of half a second at baseline. So essentially, you can only have a lightning bolt go off every half second. So you can't just like super fast shotgun somebody with a really fast lightning skill like Ball Lightning. Now, I've just hopped into a T15 Forge map with plus 98% more monster life with a boss at the end. So let's jump to the boss and I'll show you what kind of damage we can deal. And keep in mind that with my Atlas passives, this is a +4 difficulty boss as well. All right, now here we are at the boss. Now keep in mind that because this is a lightning damage build, our lightning damage range is super high. It's from 4,000 to 84,000. So basically, the main goal here is to shock the boss with Spark. We have all of our support gems set up to shock him as quickly as possible. And then we want to get one of those really high damage crits that do 1,000,000 damage. Oh, geez. 3 million damage, 4 million damage, and this guy's got 100% more life, keep in mind. 6 million damage. He is a tanky boy. And there you go. He's dead. So now that I've shown you what the build can do, let's talk about our skills. So we have Greater Lightning Bolt, which like I said, will go off every time our spark crits. Now it has a cast time and a cast per second, but since this is a triggered skill that is basically completely bypassed, you'll also notice that the DPS in here is actually multiplied by this cast time and cast per second. So it's not completely accurate. If you take or remove cast speed from your build, you will see your DPS change, but it really doesn't matter. It's basically the 0.5 second cooldown that you have to worry about. In order to maximize damage, I am running Considered Casting, Elemental Focus, Conk Effect, and we're running a Life Tap. Now this is a big issue with the build when we're running Blood Mage and we're also using Arc Mage that we managed to fix with Life Tap, and it has been working amazingly. So long story short, Greater Lightning Bolt does not have a mana cost. However, if you're running Arc Mage, it says that non-channeling spells cost an additional 5% of your maximum mana. This will actually apply to your Greater Lightning Bolt, and every time your Greater Lightning Bolt goes off, it will cost you 5% of your max mana. Now that is every half a second, including all the casts of Spark that we're dealing, and it was chewing through my mana rather aggressively. So one of the viewers in my Twitch chat suggested that I try Life Tap, and it worked great. Blood Mage made this work perfectly. In fact, I think if you're going to run Choir of the Storms, Blood Mage is actually the best way to do it. When you convert all the costs to life, Blood Mage is able to regain that life super fast, and because of our blood orbs that we drop on the ground, we're able to get our life up to 4,000 max life. So that cost is basically nothing. Now we are running Mind Over Matter in this build, and we're trying to stack as much mana as possible to maximize the effect of this Arc Mage. So keeping mana cost down is pretty important. The only mana cost that we really have to worry about is our Spark mana cost, and since this is a Blood Mage, half of that cost is going to be converted to life as well. So as you can see here, it costs 187 mana and 76 life. That extra mana cost is actually coming from the Arc Mage, so if I turn it off, it goes down to 83, and there's some other tiny little cost multipliers that we have in our passive tree that will make a difference to that as well. But for the most part, the vast majority of our cost is coming from Arc Mage, and since Spark really doesn't do that much damage, I decided to just throw Inspiration in here. The other support gems that we're using are Lightning Mastery, just because we didn't have any sockets left to put it into the Greater Lightning Bolt. We're running Overcharge for increased shock magnitude and Conduction for 100% more chance to shock. Getting the maximum shock value onto your enemies is super important because it's going to basically increase your damage by 50%. I also have Mana Tempest on this build. It basically creates a circle around you that will slowly drain your life and mana away, and every time you cast, it will increase the amount that it drains until you reach 1, and then will go away. It's pretty dangerous. However, if you really need some extra burst damage, or like at the start of a boss fight, it's a great way to boost your damage up. So as you can see here, if I use Mana Tempest, my damage goes up to 238,000 from that 198 or so. As of right now, it adds 84% damage as lightning damage onto empowered spells. Now, Archmage really is the crux of this build, and as many of you may know, this is an extremely powerful skill right now, and it's basically the main way that you can get lots and lots of damage onto your lightning builds, or really any build, honestly. Long story short, your spells gain a percentage of damage as extra lightning damage for each 100 max mana that you have. We have 3,000 maximum mana, so 30 times 8 is 240% of damage as extra lightning damage. That is a crazy amount of extra damage. The only issue is that it costs you 5.1% of your max mana every time you cast those skills, but as we showed earlier, we were actually able to manage that cost rather easily. If you've seen my Hexblast build, you'll see the big difference between the life cost and the mana cost of these two builds. In your Mana Tempest, you can run Premeditation that basically increases those empowered spells to deal 15% more damage. It's basically just more free damage. And lastly, I have Mana Remnants in here. Now, I am not currently running Mana Remnants because I'm out of spirit, but if you were able to get a chest piece or some sort of way to have a little bit more spirit, all you need is 30 extra spirit because the Archmage costs 100, then you could run Mana Remnants as well. And this will give you a little bit more survivability because every time you critically hit, you will spawn basically a blood orb that gives you mana instead. It functions exactly the same, and it's actually quite cool and thematic with Blood Mage. So if you get that a little bit of extra spirit, it is actually kind of a cool spell to use. The whole build synergizes really well. Every time we crit, we spawn a life remnant that will spawn a blood orb that will give us more health. That health can overcap our maximum life up to twice as much, I believe. So we can get up to 5,000 life. It's pretty rare to hit that high because we're spending so much life on our mana costs as well. It's essentially costing us 5% of our maximum mana in life every time we hit somebody, as well as the extra 76 life that it costs from Spark. Also, when we crit, we get our greater lightning bolt that goes off and does huge damage. And if you have the spirit, you can run mana remnants that also goes off on crits. So critting is super important. And the huge thing about Choir of the Storms is critical hits ignore enemy monster lightning resistance. So this means that we do not have to run any curses. We don't have to run exposure. We don't have to run any pen. It does all of that for us. Every time you crit, it will completely ignore their lightning resistance. So there are really not many map mods that we can't do, because if the monsters have more Ellie res, it doesn't matter. This build is pretty tanky, so we can do most of the added damage mods. Life recovery is easy because all of the damage comes out of our mana before it comes out of our life. The only ones that I found that are a little bit annoying are the increased stun from monsters mod, which is annoying on literally every build, and the decreased cooldown recovery rate, because that will slow the amount of times that our greater lightning bolt can proc, but it's not impossible. It just makes your mapping a little bit slower. So let's talk about our Ascendency. We are running Blood Mage with Sanguimancy, Vitality Siphon, Gore Spike, and Sunder the Flesh. Now, if you've seen my Hexblast video, you'll know all about this already, but I will go over it real quick just in case there's people out there who don't know much about it. So Sanguimancy gives us the Life Remnant skill, which basically means that every time we crit an enemy and occasionally when they die, they will drop a Blood Orb. Picking up the Blood Orb will grant you some amount of life, and that can actually overfill your life bar up to twice your life total. So we have 2,500 life, so we could get up to a maximum of 5,000 life from that. However, you're going to be spending life on your skills and taking damage from monsters, so you're rarely ever going to see it go that high. Next, we pick up Vitality Siphon. This gives us 10% of our spell damage leached as life. Now, this is a super duper powerful ability, and 10% of damage leached is super good. Basically, as long as you're still casting and your Choir of Storm is going off, your life bar will just fill immediately back up if you take any damage. However, in this build, because we're running Mind Over Matter, we actually don't lose a whole lot of life, and really this primarily acts as a way for us to sustain our life pool in order to manage the cost of our spells. With this particular setup that I'm running, I rarely ever see the mana cost of my spells reduce my life below full, so it's basically not an issue at all. But this is there as a nice little safety net to help keep you alive. Next, we're running Gore Spike, which increases our critical damage bonus per 40 life. Now, I have heard some people say that this is not bugged anymore. However, I just tested it, and when I remove Gore Spike, my crit damage bonus listed on my skills does not change at all, and when I add it back, it once again does not change. So unless the issue is that it just doesn't show up on your tooltip, but it actually works, then maybe it still works, but as far as I can tell, this is still bugged and does absolutely nothing. So you might be asking, Joe man, why are we taking an ability that does literally nothing? Well, that's because we want Sunder the Flesh, which increases our base critical hit chance for spells to 15%. If we look at our skills, Spark right next to the critical hit chance has a crit chance of 9%, and Greater Lightning Bolt has a crit chance of 10%. So when you get increased critical hit chance on your passive tree or on your items, that will multiply this value. So that 10%, let's say we have 100% more critical hit chance, will go to 20%. When you increase the base crit chance of a spell, that is then the new value that is multiplied. So if we had 100% increased crit chance with a base crit of 15%, it's now 30% instead of 20%. It's super powerful. It makes it so that gearing this is super cheap because we do not need a buttload of crit chance in order to hit really high crit values. And as you can see here, our crit chance is at 88%. Now, Gore Spike is very powerful. A 1% damage bonus per 40 life is really good. So when this gets fixed, it will increase our crit damage bonus by about 60%. And with our current critical damage bonus of 329%, that's probably going to be about a 20% damage increase, which is pretty good. Now, just to touch quickly on the other options here that I haven't talked about, Blood Barbs just gains you extra damage as physical and makes it so that elemental damage can contribute to bleeding magnitude. It's just not really the build that we're going right now, so we don't need it. Open source makes it so that your curses have infinite duration. This is not helpful to us at all. We don't run any curses, and for the most part, people that run curses just use blasphemies. So the use cases for this are pretty niche. Grasping Wounds gives you 25% of life loss prevented and then is dealt to you over 4 seconds. Essentially what this does is it increases your max life by 25%. That's kind of what it functionally does, because a monster, in order to completely kill you in one hit, would have to deal 125% of your life, since it's prevented and then dealt to you over 4 seconds. It's pretty good if you're having some issues with survivability and you really don't need the damage. And in fact, when you are leveling this build, you will basically want to wait to put any points into your Ascendency until you can ascend at least twice, because Sanguimancy is going to give a base life cost equal to the base mana cost onto your spells, which is going to drain your life rather aggressively. So when you do your first Ascendency, I would recommend just not putting any points into Sanguimancy at all, and then as soon as you get your second Ascendency, you then go Sanguimancy into Vitality Siphon. That spell damage leeches life will completely negate the life loss from Sanguimancy and make it so that the build actually functions. On your third Ascendency, since Gore Spike is broken at the moment, you can just take it just for the spell crit chance, but if you wanted to go this increased max life and Grasping Wounds, you definitely can until you can get your fourth Ascendency. The last one down here is Crimson Power. Gain energy shield from equipped body armor as extra maximum life. I just went ahead and swapped over my passives to this, and we went from 2500 life to 3200 life, and we have a chest piece that has 500 energy shield on it. So it does seem to work even if you're running Mind Over Matter and Eldritch Battery, as we'll talk about later. So if you're really having some issues with survivability and you just need some more life, then that is a way to go, but I definitely think that just going for the extra base crit chance is better. So this is what the passive tree looks like, but as I said before, all of this information will be in the description down below on a Maxroll build guide. The main two key components of our passive tree are Mind Over Matter and Eldritch Battery. Mind Over Matter says all damage is taken from mana before life, so even if you're poisoned, or if you get hit from a monster, or if you take damage over time of some kind, it will actually come out of your mana before it comes out of your life. This is a very powerful skill because it sort of doubles your life pool, more than doubles, since we have 3000 life. We can take advantage of that really high mana pool that we have for our Archmage and use it to also protect us. We also take Eldritch Battery. Because we want as much mana as possible, we convert all of our energy shields from all of our gear and make it into mana to give us that really high mana value. The vast majority of our mana actually comes from Eldritch Battery. One important thing to note about Eldritch Battery is that the energy shield does not benefit from increases to maximum energy shield. So we don't need any of those increased max energy shield at all. Bonuses to maximum energy shield, like this node down here that says +10 to max energy shield, those will work. However, any of these ones that are a % increase will not work. One important thing about Mind Over Matter is that it gives you 50% less mana recovery rate. That's the big issue that we have to work around, because if we're going to be taking damage from our mana and have a super high mana pool, a mana flask is not going to be enough to recover it. As you can see here, I have a 20 quality mana flask with 70% increase amount recovered, and it only recovers 600 mana, and I have a 3000 mana pool. So when I was making this build, I had a couple issues to solve. One was mana regen, 2 was crit chance and crit damage, 3 was chance to shock, and 4 was maximum mana. Our entire tree is basically focused on solving those problems. So here we just started with some spell damage, went for mana regen, cast speed, crit, a little bit of lightning damage, mana regen, and magnitude to shock. We have more crit over here, mana regen, crit. Here's our mana regen and Mind Over Matter stuff. We have more crit here. We have lightning damage, pretend intelligence. Over here we have magnitude of shock and shock duration. Over here we have an increased effect of Arcane Surge, as well as a chance to gain Arcane Surge on critical hit. There's also another node down here that says we can gain Arcane Surge on critical hit. This basically gives us a free support gem, and Arcane Surge actually gives you more mana regen instead of increased mana regen. So it will actually multiply all of the mana regen nodes that you have on your tree and on your gear in order to give you a lot more regeneration. So these are super important nodes to take, and I also took the increased effect of Arcane Surge over here as well. For our gems, long story short, we have crit chance for spells and crit damage bonus. If you're really rich, you can also get increased damage to elemental damage or spell damage, or even increased damage to triggered spells. Because our Choir of the Storm is a triggered spell here, it will benefit from that damage, and it's the majority of our damage anyway, so it's probably cheaper to do that too. However, jewels like that start to cost quite a bit of currency, like up to a divine or more. All right, so let's talk about gear. As I said before, all of this gear cost me a divine or less. Now, things may have inflated. Basically, while I was playing this build, I saw a divine go from like 150 exalts to like over 250 exalts. So inflation is not taken into account here, but it's all cost me a divine or less. Long story short, we just want as much lightning and spell damage as possible, as much crit chance as possible, and as high of a level to all lightning spell skills as we could get. It's possible that focusing on plus level to lightning skills is better. However, this was just the best wand I could find within my price range at the time. As you can see here, our Greater Lightning Bolt is level 23, so it does benefit from these plus level to lightning spell affixes. For our helmet, we just want ES, life, mana, and resists. For our chest piece, I went with a base of a Keth Raiment, which gives a mana regen increase as a implicit. So every Keth Raiment, unless it's been corrupted, is going to have increased mana regen on it. So it's a pretty good way to go. But once again, we just went for more energy shield, life, and resistances. For our rings, I went for life, regen, mana, resistances, and increased lightning damage. And it's pretty much the same story over here. For our focus, we want to get one that has crit chance and plus level to all spell skills. So that's how we've managed to get +4 to our Greater Lightning Bolt. It has a base of level 19, so +2 is +4. For our gloves, your gloves can actually roll crit damage bonus on them, so I decided to fit some of that in there as well. Our belt is kind of poo-poo, but it has lots of life and lots of mana and some chaos res, so I didn't really need more than that, as well as increased flask mana recovery rate, which is kind of helpful, I guess. For our boots, we definitely want to prioritize movement speed first, but then energy shield, life, resistances, those are all good. Now for Acquire the Storm, depending on the level that the item dropped at, it will have a level of Greater Lightning Bolt, I think from 17 to 19. I was not able to find a Greater Lightning Bolt of level 20, which would have been nice because that would have given us this extra socket. As far as I can tell, the level of the spell that it grants you makes a difference on how many sockets that you have. So level 19 is the highest. I think I bought this one with really good lightning resist rolls and a good dexterity roll for like 10 exalts. For an Anoint, I added Mana Blessings, which is this node right over here that just gives us plus to max mana and a 5% increased max mana. That's both survivability and damage, so it's a pretty good one to take. However, there may be better ones out there for you to do. For a charm, I usually run Immunity to Freeze for the most part if I have a belt with only one charm slot. Now for runes in our gear, my runes are currently a little bit eclectic. I think I could narrow them down a little bit more, but this is just what I had on hand at the moment. I have Chaos Res up here. I can actually swap this one out because I think I got my Chaos Res high enough. Yeah, I did. So I can swap that out. If you can fit it in there, you really want to have the increase to maximum mana because that's going to give you more damage and more survivability. So you just try to fit those in where you can. However, these are about 50 plus exalts a piece, so they can be a little bit expensive, and I just didn't get around to changing them out. Now, the ones in your Keth Raiment, I have decided to make 20% increase armor, evasion, and energy shield. So this increase will actually apply to the base value on the item itself, which will then go into your mana pool. So I think that putting these ones into your chest piece is going to be the best because that's going to have the highest value of energy shield. And it's going to be a little bit better than the % to mana increases. However, depending on how much energy shield you have on your chest piece, you may want to try it differently. These last two down here, I just have plus to max mana and increased mana regeneration rate. These could definitely be changed to increase total mana as well. Now, when you're leveling this build, you can pretty much just run the build as a spark build where you just run around with lightning mastery and considered casting and just whatever else you can fit in here and just try to find as much lightning damage on your gear as possible. It's not a bad build. It'll pretty much just work fine on its own because Spark is so powerful at the moment. But that's all I've got for today, guys. Hopefully you found this build guide helpful and you find the build fun if you give it a try. Let me know if there's any secret tech that you can think of that might make the build even better than it is. If you want to watch me play Path of Exile 2, I stream on both YouTube and Twitch on most Thursdays and Fridays from about 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. US Central Time. My Twitch is twitch.tv/JoeManLuke, so you can go over there and give that a follow. Don't forget to like and subscribe and do all that BS because it really helps me out. And other than that, I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Peace out.